So like I said, so the basal plate of the medulla oblongata. So we are talking about the development of medulla oblongata. So let us talk about the basal plate. Okay. So the basal plate will have certain collections of motor nuclei, each of which will perform a specific function. Right. So these are known as the functional nuclear columns of the brainstem, and they're all derived from the nuclei. I'm repeating again. All these are derived from the nuclei of cranial nerves number 3rd to 12. Okay, not first and second, because first and second will derive, okay, from the forebrain, right? Okay, so let us start with the basal plate. So from the midline, from medial to lateral, from the midline, starting from near the midline, we have the somatic motor column, also known as somatic efferent column. So efferent means motor. Okay, so efferent means the fibers are exiting, right? Okay, they're going to innervate the muscles. So somatic motor or the somatic efferent column. Then you have the next nuclei, the next motor nuclei, which is shown in orange color. So this column is known as the special visceral efferent, SVE. This is the right term. Okay. So please use the word efferent instead of motor. SVE, special visceral efferent, also known as branchioefferent or branchiomotor column. So this special visceral efferent column, okay, this will innervate the muscles which are derived from the pharyngeal arches. That's why it is also known as branchiomotor column. Somatic efferent column will innervate muscles which are derived from the somatic wall, okay, body wall, okay. Then you have the general visceral efferent, okay, GVE. So this is parasympathetic component, okay. So this will be applicable to all the parasympathetic ganglia which are attached to the cranial nerves, which will innervate like certain glands, submandibular gland, sublingual gland, the lacrimal gland. Okay, then you have the ciliary ganglion, which will innervate the sphincter pupillary muscles. Okay, so this is the parasympathetic column for the cranial nerves. Then coming to the alar plate. Now, at the junction between the basal plate and the alar plate, you have a deep groove, which is known as the sulcus limitans. Okay, so the sulcus limitans will form the junction between the basal plate and the alar plate. Now in the alar plate, just like the basal plate, again you'll have 3 nuclear columns. Okay, 3 nuclear columns. Now remember, since your alar plate is all sensory, so you will use the word afferent here. Afferent, because nerve fibers are entering. Okay, they're not exiting, but they're entering. Efferent fibers exit the brainstem. Nerve fibers will enter the brainstem, carrying the impulses. Right? Okay. So carrying the sensory impulses, right? So here in the alar plate, you have 3 sensory functional columns. So again, let us start from the medial to lateral. So next to sulcus limitans in the green color, you have the general visceral afferent. Okay, so general visceral afferent means they're carrying sensory sensations from viscera, general sensations like pain, touch, temperature. Okay, then you have the next column, okay, which is known as a special visceral afferent. Now, special visceral afferent is not carrying general sensation, but they're carrying special sensation like taste, okay, hearing, balance in relation to cranial nerves. Clear? So, taste, hearing, balance will come under special visceral afferent column. Okay, and you have the last lateral functional nuclear column, okay, which is known as the general somatic afferent column. So general somatic afferent column, okay, this will again carry general sensations, right, okay, like pain, touch, temperature from the region of the face and the other parts of the head region, right, okay. So these are the various functional nuclear columns, and 3 are seen each, okay, in each of the plates. So you'll have 3 nuclear functional columns, motor columns in the basal plate, okay, each of which will perform a specific function. And you'll have 3 sensory nuclear functional columns in the alar plates, right? Okay. Now, which cranial nerves will be located at which part of the brainstem? We will discuss now in detail. Okay. So, you know that the cranial nerves from 3rd to 12, all of them will not arise from medulla oblongata. Okay. So, certain cranial nerves will arise from medulla oblongata, certain cranial nerves will arise at the level of pons, and certain cranial nerves will arise at the level of midbrain. Right? Okay. And accordingly, they will carry specific functions. Okay. So here, okay, so already we have discussed that the development of myelencephalon, how the medulla oblongata develops. It will have a pair of basal plates, a pair of alar plates. The only difference between the spinal cord is that the lateral walls of the neural tubes are everted, okay, they are stretched out, okay, like a book, due to which the roof plate is also stretched out, okay. So why the lateral wall and the roof plate is stretched out? It is because of the expanding ventricle cavity. So you have a large ventricle here. So what is the ventricle of the hindbrain called? Anyone? What is the ventricle cavity of the hindbrain called? It is known as a fourth ventricle. Yes, very good. So fourth ventricle is a large ventricle. Okay, it is not a small cavity. It is a large ventricle, right? So because of the presence of this large ventricle, you will see that the lateral wall of the medulla oblongata, it opens up. Okay, it gets everted like a book, and the roof plate is also gets stretched. Now let us see the development of the roof plate. Now, now I told you earlier that the roof plate will form the roof of the fourth ventricle, okay, and it undergoes certain modification. Now this roof plate, since it forms the roof of the fourth ventricle, now as a golden rule, please note this, that wherever you have a ventricular cavity, it will always be lined by ependymal cell, right? Ependymal cell, which is lastly derived from neuroepithelial layer of the neural tube. Okay, so it is lined by a single layer of ependymal cells, and this single layer of ependymal cells is in turn covered by a vascular pia mater, vascular layer of pia mater. So pia mater is vascular, so that will cover the single layer of the ependymal cells, and together they will form the choroid plexus. Okay, so this choroid plexus is nothing but invaginations of tuft of capillaries, okay, tuft like capillaries. They will invaginate into the lumen of the fourth ventricle or any ventricle, okay, and they will produce CSF. So the function of choroid plexus is to produce CSF. So you have three ventricles, okay, which have the name ventricles in them. You have the lateral ventricle, you have the third ventricle, you have the fourth ventricle, okay. So lateral ventricle, third ventricle, fourth ventricle, all these ventricles will contain choroid plexus, which is derived from vascular invagination, okay, of the vascular pia mater, which is lined by ependyma. Okay, so together they will form invagination, a capillary invagination into the lumen of the fourth ventricle, and this is known as the choroid plexus, and they produce CSF. Right? Okay. Okay, so let us have a look at the which cranial nerves will will occupy each of these functional nuclear columns at the level of medulla oblongata. Okay, so let us start with somatic efferent column. So somatic efferent column, at the level of medulla oblongata, you have the nucleus of the 12th cranial nerve. Okay, so the nucleus of the 12th cranial nerve lies at the level of medulla oblongata, and it belongs to somatic efferent column. Okay, so you know that 12th cranial nerve, what does it innervate? It innervates the muscles of tongue. Okay, so tongue is a somatic structure, it innervates the muscles of tongue, right? So this will come under the somatic efferent column, the 12th cranial nerve. Okay, then you have the next column, that is your special visceral efferent or the branchiomotor or the branchioefferent column. So here you will have the nuclei of 3 cranial nerves, 9, 10, 11. Okay, so these 3 cranial nerves will innervate the muscles of the pharyngeal arches. Okay, so you know that the 9th cranial nerve is the nerve of the 3rd pharyngeal arch. Okay, right? Your 10th cranial nerve is the nerve of the 4th and 6th pharyngeal arch. Okay, and your 11th cranial nerve is the nerve of the 6th pharyngeal arch. So they will innervate the muscles of the pharyngeal arches, right? So that's why it is called special visceral efferent or branchioefferent, right? And then you have the next column, the last motor nuclear column of the basal plate, that is a general visceral efferent column, which is belonging to the parasympathetic component. Okay, so you know that the parasympathetic system has 2 outflows. You have the cranial outflow, you have the sacral outflow. So we are not talking about the sacral outflow, which belongs to the spinal cord. Here we are talking about the cranial outflow, right? So which cranial outflow, or in other words, which cranial nerves is responsible for the cranial outflow of the parasympathetic component? That will be classified under GVE. Okay, so GVE is also known as a parasympathetic component, and which cranial nerves is responsible for the cranial nerve outflow is the 10th cranial nerve, okay, the nucleus of the 10th cranial nerve, which lies at the level of medulla oblongata, right? Okay, so these are the special cranial nerves which are occupying each functional motor column. So I hope this is clear. Each of them will have a specific function, right? Okay, then you have the alar plate. Okay, so in the alar plate, again you have the 3 sensory functional columns. So starting from the sulcus limitans, next to sulcus limitans, from medial to lateral, we have the general visceral afferent. Okay, so this will be carried by the 10th cranial nerve. Okay, so your 10th cranial nerve will carry the general sensations from the viscera. Okay, like from the stomach, from the digestive tract, from the respiratory tract. Okay, from the heart, right? Okay, so these general sensations from the viscera will be carried, like hunger, pain, sometimes you experience stomach pain. So these are general visceral sensations carried through 10th cranial nerve, right? Okay, then you have the next component, the special visceral afferent, SVA. Okay, so this special visceral afferent component will be carried through the 9th cranial nerve. Okay, so your 9th cranial nerve is responsible for carrying this visceral sensations, okay, like taste. Okay, special visceral sensations means like taste sensations. Okay, from the pharynx, okay, from the oral cavity, from the epiglottis. So this will be carried through the 9th cranial nerve, right? Okay, and then lastly you have the somatic afferent sensations. So somatic afferent sensations are general sensations of pain, touch, temperature, which will be carried again through the 9th cranial nerve, okay, from the pharynx region. Right? Okay. So these are the various nuclei of the cranial nerves which lie at the level of medulla oblongata. Okay. So we are talking of only medulla oblongata and what nuclei of cranial nerves arise from this level. I hope it is clear. And accordingly, we have classified each cranial nerve according to its functional component. Right? Okay. I hope there is no confusion here. Okay, so now in the first picture, that is B, you can see that there is some migration. You can see the arrow marked in the marginal white layer. Okay, so if you see the arrow marked in the marginal white layer, that shows the migration of neurons from this alar plate. Okay, from the alar plate, the neurons migrate into the margin layer opposite the basal plate. Okay, and these neurons come to C, these neurons will form the olivary nuclear complex. Okay, so here you can see olivary nucleus. So they are part of the olivary nuclear complex. So these nucleus, okay, the olivary nucleus, the neurons of this olivary nucleus are derived from the migration of cells coming from the alar plate, right? Okay, so this is a dorsal view of the brainstem in the 6th week, right? And you're seeing the brainstem from the top. So here the roof plate has been cut. The roof plate, which will form the roof of the 4th ventricle, has been cut. So what you can see is the floor of the 4th ventricle. So you know that the floor of the 4th ventricle is formed in the lower part by the medulla oblongata, and in the upper part, the floor of the 4th ventricle is formed by pons, right? Okay. So you can see the alignment of the two plates. You can see the basal plate, okay, which lies to the midline. There's a groove there in the midline, right? And next to the basal plate, you can see the alar plate, which is again separated by another groove. That is your sulcus limitans, right? Okay, and you can see the myelin cephalon, which is labeled there. So myelin cephalon, okay, will form the floor of the lower half of the 4th ventricle. Floor of the lower part of the 4th ventricle. Metencephalon will form the floor of the upper part of the floor of the 4th ventricle. Clear? Okay? Okay. Okay, so we have finished with the development of medulla oblongata. Now we will start with the development of metencephalon. So metencephalon will give rise to pons and cerebellum. Keep that in mind. Two structures, pons and cerebellum. So that's why pons, cerebellum and medulla oblongata, they form the hindbrain, which together constitutes the rhombencephalon, right? Okay. So let us see first the development. Let us see the alignment of structures. So again, the alignment of structures is similar to that of the spinal cord. Okay. So here again you'll have the basal plate, you'll have the alar plate, and just like in medulla oblongata, the basal plate will have 3 functional motor column, okay? The alar plate will have 3 sensory functional nuclear columns, right? Now we are talking at the level of the metencephalon. That means at the level of pons. You know, pons is part of your brainstem, not cerebellum. Cerebellum is part of the hindbrain, okay? Right? I hope this is clear. Cerebellum is part of the hindbrain. Your cerebellum does not give rise to any cranial nerves. Keep that in mind. Cerebellum does not give rise to any cranial nerves. Only pons gives. Okay? Pons gives rise to certain cranial nerves. So let us see the nuclei of which cranial nerves lies at the level of pons. Okay? According to their functional classification. So let us come to the basal plate. So in the basal plate, just like your medulla oblongata, you'll again here have 3 functional motor columns. So from medial to lateral, same name you'll have, okay? So starting with somatic efferent. Now which nucleus of cranial nerve will lie at the level of pons? So the answer is 6th cranial nerve, okay? So you have the nucleus of 6th cranial nerve, and what is 6th cranial nerve? Sixth cranial nerve is also known as abducens nerve, right? So abducens nerve innervates lateral rectus muscle of the eyeball. It's an extraocular muscle of the eyeball, so it is a somatic tissue, right? So that's why it will come under somatic efferent component. Clear? Okay. Then come to special visceral efferent. So special visceral efferent or brachioefferent means these cranial nerves will innervate those muscles which are derived from branchial arches. Keep that in mind, branchial arches. Okay. That's why it's called special, because they're derived from branchial arches, right? So special visceral efferent, the cranial nerves, the nuclei of the cranial nerves which will lie at the level of pons will belong to the motor nuclei of the fifth cranial nerve, which is the motor nuclei of the fifth nerve, which is the trigeminal nerve, and the motor nuclei of the seventh cranial nerve, which is known as the facial nerve. Okay, so motor nuclei of cranial nerves fifth, trigeminal, and seventh facial nerve will lie at the level of pons. Their nucleus will lie at the level of pons. Okay, that means they will arise at the level of pons. In other words, right? Okay. Then you have the general visceral efferent component or the parasympathetic component. Okay, so this will arise from the motor nuclei of the seventh cranial nerve. That is your facial nerve. Okay, so you know that the seventh facial nerve is one of the cranial nerves which is responsible for the cranial outflow of the parasympathetic system. It will innervate your submandibular gland, sublingual gland, and your lacrimal gland. Clear? Okay. To the two ganglions. So you have the submandibular ganglion and you have the pterygopalatine ganglion. So these are parasympathetic ganglion which are attached to the seventh cranial nerve. Okay. So that finishes your basal plate. Now you come to the alar plate, which is shown in the blue area. Okay. So from medial to lateral you have the general visceral afferent. Okay. So general visceral afferent is carried by the seventh cranial nerve, that is your facial nerve. Okay. So this will carry the general sensations, okay, from the anterior 2/3 of the tongue, right? Okay. Then you have the next one, that is your special visceral afferent, that is the seventh and your eighth cranial nerve. Okay. So seventh and eighth cranial nerve, okay, that is your facial and the vestibulocochlear nerve. So seventh cranial nerve will carry special sensations of taste, okay, from the anterior 2/3 of tongue, and the eighth cranial nerve or the vestibulocochlear nerve will carry the special sensations of hearing and balance. Hearing and balance, right? And you have the last component, that is the somatic afferent component. So this somatic afferent component is signified by the nucleus of fifth and seventh cranial nerve. Okay, so the fifth cranial nerve, that is the sensory nucleus. Okay, the sensory nucleus of the fifth cranial nerve is represented by the trigeminal ganglion. Okay, so the trigeminal ganglion is responsible for innervating, for carrying general sensations from the face region. Okay, so like pain, touch, temperature. So those are the somatic components. And your seventh cranial nerve, that is your facial nerve, will also carry certain general sensations near the ear, near the pinna, especially near the tragus of the ear. Okay, so these are the various components, okay, of the functional nuclear columns of both the basal plate and the alar plates. Okay, so I hope you have understood this part. Okay, now coming to the development of the cerebellum. Now, if you have a look at the development of the cerebellum, you'll see that the dorsolateral part of the alar plates, okay, the dorsolateral part of the alar plate, it bends inwards, okay, bends inwards, slightly protruding into the lumen of the fourth ventricle and slightly overlapping the roof of the fourth ventricle. Okay, so this extension, so you can see these two lip-like extensions over the roof of the fourth ventricle and slightly protruding into the lumen, they will form the rhombic lips. Okay, so it is from the rhombic lips that your cerebellum develops. Okay, so since you have two rhombic lips, you'll have two hemispheres of cerebellum. You'll have the right hemisphere and you'll have the left hemisphere. Okay, now what happens to the marginal layer opposite the basal plate, okay, of the pons? So here you have a look, you'll see that the marginal layer, and this I forgot to mention, the marginal layer opposite the basal plate, it greatly expands. It greatly expands and it forms a bridge. Okay, so it forms a bridge where the nerve fibers will pass from the cerebrum as well as from the cerebellar cortex to the brainstem and the spinal cord. So this marginal white layer, which greatly expands opposite the basal plate, will form a bridge which is also known as pons. So that is how pons gets its name, because pons means bridge, right? So just remember, the white marginal layer opposite the basal plate greatly expands to form the bridge or the ventral aspect of the pons, right? Okay, now here simultaneously you'll have the migration of neurons from the alar plate. So certain neurons from the alar plate will migrate, okay, into the white marginal layer opposite the basal plate, where they will form a collection of nuclei, which is known as the pontine nuclei, right? So these pontine nuclei lies in the white matter of the ventral aspect of the pons, okay? So that is the development of your pons, and your rhombic lips, which is nothing but represented as the dorsolateral extension of the alar plate, okay? So the alar plate will extend backwards and slightly laterally and form the rhombic lips, and this rhombic lips will give rise to cerebellum, okay? Okay, now let us see further what happens to the rhombic lips. So here we are now talking about the rhombic lips. So what will happen to the rhombic lips? So in the 8th week, you'll see that the rhombic lips, okay, they further expand in size and they get compressed from above downwards, okay. So the rhombic lips will further grow in size, and with passage of time, they get compressed from above downwards and they will form a thick plate of tissue, a thick plate of tissue. So this plate of tissue is known as cerebellar plate. Okay, cerebellar plate. Now this cerebellar plate has two parts. One portion will lie outside the roof of the fourth ventricle, so that is known as the extraventricular part, and one part will lie within the fourth ventricle, that is your intraventricular part. So it has two parts, extraventricular and intraventricular part. Okay. Okay, so now you come to the next picture, that is in the 4th month. So as the development progresses, okay, the central part, okay, or the midline part of the cerebellar plate, okay, it remains narrow, as you can see in the picture, remains narrow and will form the vermis. The midline portion of the cerebellum is called vermis, which looks like a worm, okay. So vermis is derived from worm, okay. And the lateral portions of the cerebellar plate, okay, it will expand greatly, okay. So the lateral parts of the cerebellar plate on either side will expand greatly and form the cerebellar hemisphere on either side. Clear? So in the 4th month, you can see the development of the cerebellar hemisphere, which is derived from the lateral part of the cerebellar plate. The central part or the midline part of the cerebellar plate will, however, remain narrow and form the vermis, right? Okay. Now, at the same time, during this 4th month, you'll see that the most primitive lobe of the cerebellum develops. That is the nodule and the flocculus, which you can see in B. Okay. So these, the nodule is actually part of the vermis. Okay. So this will get separated, and this is the first part of the vermis to develop, the first lobe of the vermis to develop, and the flocculus, okay, which is the lateral part, okay, of the hemisphere. It also becomes quite distinct, okay. And there is a fissure which will demarcate. There's a deep transverse fissure, okay, which will demarcate the nodule and the flocculus from the rest of the cerebellar hemisphere and the vermis, okay. So that's why we say that the flocculo-nodular lobe, since it is the first part of the vermis and the first part of the lateral lobe of the hemisphere to develop from the cerebellum, this forms the most primitive lobe of the cerebellum. Clear? Okay. The flocculo-nodular lobe is the most primitive lobe of the cerebellum, right? Okay. So it gets differentiated from the rest of the cerebellum by a deep transverse fissure. Okay. Now in the lower half of the roof of the fourth ventricle, you can see certain openings or certain foramen, right? So in the midline, you can see the foramen of Magendie, which is represented as a single foramen. It is a midline aperture. And same thing, you'll have a pair of lateral foramina, okay, at the lateral angles of the roof of the fourth ventricle. So these are known as the foramen of Luschka. Okay, so what is the significance of this foramen? The significance of this foramen is that the CSF fluid, which is circulating through the ventricular cavities, you know that the CSF fluid is produced by the choroid plexus. So wherever the choroid plexus is present, CSF is produced, and the CSF will enter into the subarachnoid space through the foramen of Luschka and through the foramen of Magendie. So they will circulate into the subarachnoid space and circulate around the rest of the brain, right? Okay, some of the CSF will pass directly into the central canal from the fourth ventricle. They will pass directly into the central canal of the spinal cord, right? Okay, so let us go into further details how the cerebellar cortex forms. So in general, we have discussed about the development of cerebellum from the rhombic lips. Now let us see how the cerebellar cortex formation takes place. Now please remember, before I start, cerebellum and cerebrum, okay, these two, you can just write it down. Cerebellum and cerebrum, the cortex, okay. Cerebellar cortex and cerebral cortex, they represent higher centers of the brain compared to the brainstem and the spinal cord. Clear? Okay? They represent the higher centers. So you'll have higher motor centers, higher sensory centers. They're located in the cerebral cortex and the cerebellar cortex. So the basic structural organization which you saw in the spinal cord and the brainstem will not be here. Okay, it will not be here. Right? So like how you saw the basal plates was arranged into 3 functional columns in the brainstem, that arrangement you're not going to see here. Okay? So the arrangement of the basal plate and alar plate will be completely different. And when you talk about higher centers in the cerebral cortex and the cerebellar cortex, okay, please note that the alar plate, okay, the alar plate is greatly accentuated here. Okay, so alar plate is greatly accentuated in the higher centers of cerebellum and cerebrum, whereas the basal plates tend to show a regression. Okay, basal plates tend to regress, whereas the alar plates are highly accentuated in the cerebral cortex and cerebellar cortex. Right? Okay, okay. So let us start with number 1. So here, okay. So like in all the cut sections of the neural tube, you'll have 3 layers. You'll have the neuroepithelial layer, okay, the innermost, then you have the intermediate layer or the mantle layer, and you have the outer marginal layer. Okay, so you know that your marginal layer will form the white matter, okay, of the CNS, the mantle layer will form the gray matter of the CNS, and the neuroepithelial is the parent layer, okay, from which all these layers are derived, right? Okay. So let us see here, you have the basic arrangement of the 3 layers. This is a very primitive, this is the very early development of the brain. Okay. Now let us come to B. So in the B, you'll see that what happens is that the neuroepithelial layer, which is marked number 1 in A, the neuroepithelial layer, okay, will divide as usual. Okay. It will divide rapidly and progressively. It will give rise to certain cells, okay, and these cells, okay, which are derived from the neuroepithelial layer, they will migrate towards the surface of the cerebellum, and they will form the first layer of the cerebellum, which is known as the external granular layer. Okay, which is known as external granular layer. So again, I will repeat, the neuroepithelial layer, okay, will give rise to a series of neuroblasts, okay, and these series or these waves of neuroblasts will migrate to the surface of the cerebellum to form the first layer, that is your external granular layer. So see, the development is completely different from the spinal cord and brainstem, okay, right? So here we don't have those arrangement of basal plate or alar plate, but you'll have the 3 layers which you see throughout the sections of the neural tube. That is your neuroepithelial, mantle, marginal. Okay. Now listen carefully. Now the external granular layer, the cells of the external granular layer will proliferate rapidly. Okay, and they form a thick surface on the surface of the cerebellum. Now, and when they divide to give rise, okay, to give more rise to cells, okay, they will give rise to certain cells which are known as granule cells. Okay, so these granule cells will migrate inwards. They will migrate inwards. Okay. They will migrate inwards towards the Purkinje layer, and they will settle just below the Purkinje cell layer to form the internal granular layer. Internal granular layer. Okay. So internal granular layer is now the definitive layer, one of the definitive layers of the cerebellar cortex. Okay. So again, I'll repeat, the cells of the external granular layer will again divide, okay, proliferate rapidly to form a thick layer on the surface of the cerebellum, and at the same time, they will give rise to certain neurons which are known as the granule neurons. So these granule neurons will migrate inward, okay. They will migrate inward and they will settle, okay, as a layer below the Purkinje cell layer, and they will form the first definitive layer of the cerebellum, which is known as the internal granular layer. Okay, I hope this is clear. Okay, now you have a look at the white matter, the white marginal layer of the cerebellum, that is the 3rd layer. The white marginal layer which was initially outside, lying outermost, okay, now it lies inwards. Okay, it lies inwards because of the development of external granular layer and the Purkinje cell layer. So Purkinje cell layer also is derived from neuroepithelial layer, right? Now the cells in the white marginal layer, they will differentiate and they will produce basket cells and stellate cells. Okay, they'll produce basket cells and stellate cells, and these basket cells and stellate cells, okay, they will migrate to the surface of the cerebellum where they will settle down, okay, to form the outer molecular layer. okay, to form the outer molecular layer, right? So finally, you have the three layers of the cerebellar cortex. You have the outer molecular layer, you have the middle Purkinje layer, and you have the internal granular layer. So these three layers will form the gray matter of the cerebellum. So the gray matter of the cerebellum is also known as cerebellar cortex. Cortex means gray matter, right? Okay. Now come to the deep part. In the deep part, you can see the formation of certain cerebellar nuclei. Okay, so these are deep cerebellar nuclei, that is your dentate nucleus. So the dentate nucleus occupies very deep, okay, it lies quite deep within the cerebellum, and it occupies its final position before birth. Okay, whereas your cerebellar cortex will attain its final size only after birth. Okay, now as the cerebellar cortex is developing, okay, you'll see that your fourth ventricle also enlarges in size gradually, and there is development of choroid plexus. Okay, so what is choroid plexus? Choroid plexus is a capillary tuft ball, okay, a tuft ball made up of capillary plexus, which is derived from the vascular pia mater covered by a layer of ependyma, right? They produce CSF, okay. And the white marginal layer will now finally, okay, the white marginal layer will finally persist as the white matter of cerebellum. It will contain nerve fibers of all these neurons, right? So this is how your cerebellar cortex will look before birth and after birth. So please remember, your external granular layer is a thick layer, okay, which is present on the surface of the cerebellum. Okay, it is derived by proliferation of cells from the neuroepithelial layer. Now the cells of the external granular layer will divide rapidly, okay, and they will give rise to special cells which are called as granule cells. So these granule cells will migrate inward. As you can see, the arrow, it's pointing downward. It will migrate inward and will form a layer below the Purkinje cells. So this layer is now known as the internal granular layer. I hope it is clear. Internal granular layer. Purkinje cell will form the middle layer, and the molecular layer, okay, that is the outer molecular layer of the cerebellar cortex. The cells of the outer molecular layer are derived by proliferation of cells from the marginal layer of the cerebellum. So the marginal layer, the cells of the marginal layer of the cerebellum will give rise to certain cells called basket cells and stellate cells, okay, and even you'll have some granule cells, okay. So they will persist and they will form the outer molecular layer. So these are the three layers of the cerebellar cortex, and they attain their definitive size only after birth, okay. So I hope this is clear. So here, please remember, you do not have the arrangement of alar plate and basal plate, because this is you have the location of the higher centers here. Okay, so cerebral cortex, you have location of higher centers here, right? Now come to the development of mesencephalon. So if you see the development of mesencephalon, that is your midbrain. So since it is a part of the brain stem, now please remember, your midbrain lies at the junction. It lies at the junction of the brain stem and the forebrain. Okay. Because above your mesencephalon, you have the diencephalon and the telencephalon, which is derived from the prosencephalon. Your prosencephalon forms the forebrain, right? Okay. So since your midbrain lies near the forebrain, okay, that is a transitional zone. And since your midbrain is also part of the brain stem, you'll see that it still shares similar structural organization with the rest of the brain stem, okay, with the rest of the pons and the medulla oblongata, okay, but with slight differences, because it is lying at a transitional zone. It is lying near the forebrain now, right? Okay, and you know that your forebrain is a higher center, okay, it is not part of your brain stem. Okay, so as I told you earlier, your higher centers, that is your cerebrum, cerebellum, they do not show the structural organization which you saw in the brain stem and which you saw in the spinal cord, right? So let us see the structure in the midbrain. So remember, this is a transitional zone, so it will have features of both the brainstem and some features of the forebrain. Okay. So here in A, you can see that again you'll have a pair of basal plate and you'll have a pair of alar plate. Both these plates are demarcated by the sulcus limitans, right? And here you can see that the alar plates, they are in the form of two longitudinal elevations. Okay. Now with passage of time, what happens? The alar plate, which is in the form of two longitudinal elevations, okay, a deep transverse groove starts appearing through these two longitudinal elevations of the alar plate, okay. So a deep transverse groove will appear, and that will divide each of the alar plate into two prominent tubercles. So you will have a upper tubercle which lies above the transverse groove, which is known as the superior colliculus, and you have a tubercle which lies below the transverse groove, which is known as the inferior colliculus. Okay. Now overlying the two plates, you have the white marginal layer. Okay. Now what happens is that the neuroepithelial layer, which is lining the wall of the cavity of the neural tube. Okay. The neuroepithelial layer will now give rise to a series or waves of neuroblast. Okay. So these waves of neuroblast, okay, they will migrate. Okay, they will migrate towards the marginal layer. Okay, and they repeat in cycles. So that's why you'll see that if you take a transverse section of the midbrain, you'll see that the colliculus, they have a stratified layer appearance. So this stratified layer appearance of the colliculus is because of the series of waves of migration of the neuroblast from the neuroepithelial layer into the overlying white marginal layer. Okay, so I hope this is clear. So that's why it gives a stratified look, right? Okay. Now the basal plate, okay, the basal plates with further development, okay, it will form only two functional motor columns, as you can see over here. So it will form the somatic efferent column and it will form the general visceral efferent column. The third column is missing here. Okay, it is not present. So the somatic efferent column is represented by the nuclear components of third and fourth cranial nerve. So they lie at this level of the midbrain. And the general visceral efferent component, that is your parasympathetic component, is represented by the Edinger-Westphal nucleus of the third nerve. Okay, so it is a part of your oculomotor nuclear complex, right? So you know that the Edinger-Westphal nucleus, it will relay into the ciliary ganglion, and your ciliary ganglion, the postganglionic fibers will arise from the ciliary ganglion and they will supply the sphincter pupillary muscle. Okay, now the alar plate, okay, some of the neurons from the alar plate, they will migrate into the marginal layer, okay, opposite the basal plate, okay, and they will form two nucleus. So you have the nucleus ruber, that is the red nucleus, it will form the red nucleus and it will form the substantia nigra. Okay, so two nucleus are formed by the migration of neurons from the alar plate into the marginal layer opposite the basal plate. Okay, now what happens to the marginal layer? The marginal layer opposite the basal plate, it will expand greatly. Okay, it expands greatly and it will form the crus cerebri. So the crus cerebri they act as passageways for nerve fibers. Okay, they will connect the higher centers in the cerebrum, okay, with the lower centers in the brainstem, rest of the brainstem, and the spinal cord, right? Okay. Okay, so development of diencephalon. So quickly, the development of diencephalon. So if you see the development of diencephalon, now we're talking of the forebrain. You know that your diencephalon is part of your forebrain. So it will not have similar structural organization which you saw in the rest of the brainstem and the spinal cord, right? So here, keep in mind that the floor plate and the basal plates, they are absent, more or less absent. Okay, so what is present here in the diencephalon region? You'll have only the roof plate and the alar plate. The roof plate and the alar plate, right? So let us talk about the roof plate. So if you see the roof plate will form the roof of the third ventricle. You know that the cavity of the diencephalon is midline. It has only a single midline cavity and it is called the third ventricle. So the roof plate will form the roof of the third ventricle, just like you saw the roof plate of the medulla oblongata forming the roof of the fourth ventricle. So here likewise, you'll see that the roof plate of the diencephalon will form the roof of the third ventricle and you have the formation of the choroid plexus here. Okay, so already I told you how choroid plexus is formed and they will produce CSF, right? Now from the caudal part of the roof plate, you have a small thickening which is known as the pineal thickening. So this pineal thickening is an epithelial thickening. It will give rise to a solid cord of cells and which will form the pineal gland. Okay, so pineal gland is also derived from the roof, from the caudal part of the roof plate of the diencephalon. Okay, so two things it will form. It will form the pineal gland and it will also form the roof of the third ventricle which will form the choroid plexus from which the CSF is secreted, right? And the remaining roof plate will also contribute to parts of your epithalamus. So the most important component of epithalamus is your pineal gland. Okay, keep that in mind, right? And you know your pineal gland is responsible for secretion of melatonin. Okay, so it will regulate the light and dark. Coming from the environment, it will regulate your body behavior. Okay, your circadian rhythms will be regulated. It secretes melatonin, which is a hormone of darkness, right? Okay, now what about the alar plates? The alar plates will form the lateral walls of the diencephalon. Okay, it will form the lateral walls of the diencephalon. And from the floor of the diencephalon, you'll see the formation of the mammillary body, which is a part of the hypothalamus. Okay, so the alar plate will ultimately form the lateral wall of the diencephalon, and the LR plate will form the main part, the main component of the diencephalon, that is your thalamus and the hypothalamus. Okay, your mammillary body is part of the hypothalamus, right? Okay, so that is the main thing over here. So just remember the floor plate and the basal plate, they are absent. Now the thalamus and the hypothalamus are separated by hypothalamic sulcus. Okay, so you just keep that in mind. Now in the anterior wall of the diencephalon, you have the optic chiasma developing, you have the lamina terminalis, and you have the infundibulum or the stalk, the future stalk of the pituitary gland, which also develops from the anterior wall of the diencephalon, right? Okay, so let us talk about the development of pituitary gland. So development of pituitary gland. So in the 6th week, you'll see that there is a outpocketing or outpouching. Okay, there's an ectodermal outpocketing or ectodermal outpouching of the stomodium or the primitive oral cavity just in front of the oropharyngeal membrane. Right? Okay. So this pouch, this ectodermal pouch is known as Rathke's pouch. Right? So this Rathke's pouch, it will grow up. So as it grows upwards and dorsally, it will meet with a downward extension. So you can see there's a downward extension from the floor of the diencephalon, which is known as the infundibulum. It will go and meet with the infundibulum and it will fuse with the infundibulum. Okay. And it will form the primitive pituitary gland. Right? Now, what will the Rathke's pouch form? So, come to B in 11th week. So, in the 11th week, you'll see that the anterior wall of the Rathke's pouch, it enlarges greatly. Anterior wall of the Rathke's pouch enlarges greatly and will form the pars distalis or the anterior lobe of the pituitary gland. Right? Okay. Then, the posterior wall of the Rathke's pouch, it remains small in size, and it will form the pars intermedia. Okay, which is of little significance in humans. Right? Then there is an upward extension from the anterior lobe, okay, of the pituitary gland or from the anterior wall of the Rathke's pouch. There is an upward extension is given, which is known as the pars tuberalis. So this pars tuberalis will wind around the developing infundibulum, okay, which is derived from the diencephalon. So it winds around the stalk of the pituitary gland. Okay, and what will the infundibulum of the diencephalon form? The infundibulum of the diencephalon will form the stalk of the pituitary gland, and it will form the posterior lobe or the pars nervosa of the pituitary gland. Okay, so pars nervosa or posterior lobe of the pituitary gland and the stalk of the pituitary gland is derived from infundibulum of diencephalon. Okay, which is a downward extension given off from the floor of the diencephalon, right? And they are known as the neurohypophysis cerebri. Okay. Now, pars distalis, pars intermedia, and pars tuberalis. These three parts are derived from Rathke's pouch. Okay. And together they will form the adenohypophysis cerebri. Adenohypophysis cerebri. Okay. So, clinical anatomy quickly. So, let us see the pharyngeal hypophysis. So, pharyngeal hypophysis, this is a congenital development anomaly, and this occurs when you have a remnant of the Rathke's pouch in the roof of the nasopharynx. So when a remnant of the Rathke's pouch still persists in the roof of the nasopharynx, it will result in pharyngeal hypophysis. Okay, so this is as a result of failure of migration of the entire Rathke's pouch, because the Rathke's pouch has to migrate upwards to meet with the infundibulum. So sometimes the small anterior wall, the lower part of the anterior wall of Rathke's pouch will fail to migrate and remain in the roof of the nasopharynx as pharyngeal hypophysis. So it does not cause much problems. Okay. Then you have a more severe problem, which is known as the craniopharyngioma. Okay, so this craniopharyngioma is a very rare benign tumor of the pituitary gland. It accounts for 10 to 15% of all the pituitary tumors. Okay, and it occurs again because of the remnant. Okay, this tumor rises from the remnant of the Rathke's pouch. Okay, so remnant of the Rathke's pouch, when it persists around the infundibulum, okay, or on the stalk of the pituitary gland, it will result in a benign tumor, which is known as craniopharyngioma. Okay. Now this craniopharyngioma, if it enlarges in size, it will compress the surrounding structure. So you have the optic chiasma in front. So if it compresses optic chiasma, it will result in visual disturbances. Okay. Besides this, a person will present with headache, hydrocephalus. Okay. And raised intracranial pressure, and also it will result in pituitary disorders. So the person may present with diabetes insipidus or growth failure. Okay. Since it compresses the pituitary gland. Right. Okay, so this is cerebral cortex, corpus striatum and commissures. So here quickly in the 10th week, if you have a look over here, you can see the cerebral cortex developing. So we are now talking about the development of the telencephalon, right? So your telencephalon, if you see, you'll see that your cerebral cortex is developed from two sources. Okay, it is developed from paleopallium. Okay, so paleopallium lies lateral to the corpus striatum and from neopallium cortex. Okay, so neopallium is the newly derived, okay, cortex. Paleopallium is the older derived cortex, neopallium is the newly derived cortex, and it lies between the hippocampus and the paleopallium, right? So in neopallium cortex, what happens? The waves of neuroblast, okay, waves of neuroblast which are coming from the neuroepithelial layer, they will migrate to the surface, just like in your cerebellar cortex. They will migrate to the surface of the cerebrum, okay, where they will settle just below the pia mater, okay. Then a second wave of neuroblast will again migrate. So this second wave of neuroblast will again migrate. It will push to the first form layer, okay, and it will occupy the most superficial area of the cerebral hemisphere, where it will lie below the pia mater. Okay, so like this, the cycle keeps on repeating. Okay, so as a result, what happens? The first formed neuroblast, okay, of the cerebral cortex will now occupy a deeper position, whereas the recently formed neuroblast will occupy a more superficial position. Okay, so that's why you'll see that you'll see that the cerebral cortex shows layers. Okay, if you take a histology of the cerebral cortex, you will see that you have so many layers, stratified layers of the cerebral cortex. So this is because of the waves of the neuroblast, okay, which keep on migrating towards the surface of the cerebral hemisphere. And as a result, the older formed neuroblast will get pushed deeper. Okay. So in the region of motor cortex, you will see that you have predominance of pyramidal neurons. In the region of sensory cortex, you have predominance of granular neurons, okay, which are sensory in function, right? Okay. Now the basal part of the cerebral hemisphere, it expands greatly. Okay, so the basal part of the cerebral hemisphere on either side will expand greatly, okay, and it will show a striated appearance. Now this striated appearance will form the corpus striatum. Okay, now this corpus striatum will become demarcated into two nucleus. Okay, you have the caudate nucleus and the lentiform nucleus. So together they form the corpus striatum, right? Now the caudate nucleus and the lentiform nucleus, okay, they are demarcated over a period of time with the passage of nerve fibers or axons, okay, which are passing to and fro from the cerebral cortex. So these band of nerve fibers which passes between the caudate nucleus and the lentiform nucleus will form the internal capsule. Okay, which will form the internal capsule. Okay, now over a period of time, the medial wall of the hemisphere, okay, will fuse with the lateral wall of the diencephalon, and that's why your thalamus now lies very close to caudate nucleus, almost in contact with the caudate nucleus. And you can see the choroid plexus, okay, which develops in the medial wall of the hemisphere, okay, at the junction of the medial wall and the floor of the hemisphere. It develops, right, okay, near the roof of the diencephalon. So this is the choroid plexus of the lateral ventricle, and this will produce your CSF.